¿Contestó Carlitos?
No, todavía no.
Sí, no, no he enviado nada por correo. 27. Para
¿Quieres que
quienes
le
no.
llame?
Sí, pues si se puede,
Sí.
Carlos, sí. Nada más para saber por si hubo algún problema. Nada más cierra tu audio. Y
Ya.
para los que todavía no han activado la función de traducción simultánea, en el chat subimos un pequeño documento de cómo se puede hacer la activación. De todos modos, aprovechando este tiempecito, les comentaré que en esta parte inferior derecha, donde dice más, ahí pueden hacer clic y aparecerá este, este menú y entonces uno selecciona subtítulos que tiene este loguito de CC, porque puede estar en inglés, captions. Cuando ya lo activan, en la parte baja de su menú va a aparecer esto de Show Captions. Y después tienen que
Ya, ya,
decir,
ya le llamé. Dice que tenía el horario mal, pero se conecta en 5 minutos.
uy, bueno, espero estaba ya dormido. Bueno, y uno pone el idioma en que habla, uno pondrá español y el idioma en que quiere aparezcan sus subtítulos y ya. Y entonces ya cuando uno le hace clic en la barra inferior, ¿sabes qué pasó, Carlos? Cambiaron horario.
Sí, por eso te decía que es que como México ya tiene, como decía Dan Augusto, el horario de Dios, este, ya no cambiamos el
No,
horario.
ellos cierto, cambiaron esta semana,
Y
pero bueno, está bien,
ellos sí cambian todavía.
ahorita viene, muy bien. Y aquí ya cuando ustedes aprietan CC, aparece ya un cuadrito con lo que se esté hablando. Ujú. Entonces nada más.
Bueno, para quienes se están conectando ahora, ahí está, ya llegó. Ya no, ya les iba a decir.
Muy bien, estamos listos.
Sí, ok.
Perfecto. Creo que ya está dentro, sí, ¿verdad?
Sí, ya nada
A
más
ver,
se
nada
está
más voy
conectando
a,
Chao.
sí, sí, volverla co-host. Eh, Dear Dr.
Can
Strabula,
yes, you can hear me?
we are ready. Let me explain you how you can activate the translation, the simultaneous translation. In the lower edge, you have this circle with the 3 points. You click, you get this menu, and you have to activate the captions.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Can you show me again where it is, which points?
In the lower
Uh-huh.
lower right,
In the
this
lower menu,
circle with the 3 dots, more, it says more, like this.
Yeah, I can see that. That's the thing. Let me just see.
This,
Show captions, maybe.
yes,
uh-huh.
full
Translation
No,
captions.
on.
you, you,
Okay.
you have the captions already?
Yeah, I found. So I turned it on, and my speaking language English, my caption language Spanish. Let me
Spanish.
find it.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Then you click the show captions, and we are we are ready.
So can you see it now?
Now we all have to activate it ourselves. So
Uh,
each of us will activate it, but we want you to have it activated so you can hear us in Spanish.
mhm.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, so I activated mine, so it should be
Okay,
fine.
so let's make a
Yeah,
test to see if
yeah.
you already can read us in
We are
English.
ready. Yeah. Then, thank you, dear Strabula. Let me introduce you before you start with the session. Um, this is our esta es nuestra sesión mensual de el Colegio Ramazzini en conjunto con la FE Zaragoza, en este ciclo de sesiones dirigidas a hablar sobre la promoción de la salud y bienestar en el trabajo. Y en esta ocasión tenemos el honor de contar con la presencia de la autora Dra Leka, que nos va a hablar sobre la conceptualización de los riesgos psicosociales en el trabajo. Ella primero va a hacer su presentación, habría algunas preguntas y posteriormente haremos un panel de discusión sobre lo que ella nos presente. Quería yo hacer una breve presentación de ella. Bueno, además de que es decir que es una joven y brillante investigadora en esta área, también yo creo que algo que la caracteriza es que es una gente muy comprometida con la salud mental y física de los trabajadores, ¿no? Y eso se ve en su actividad. Actualmente es directora del Centro de Salud y Bienestar Organizacional en la Universidad de Lancaster, es presidenta de la Academia Europea de Psicología de la Salud Ocupacional, está en ICO, en el board de ICO, y algo que es muy importante y que yo no lo sabía mucho, no lo tenía muy claro. Ella fue de las responsables del desarrollo de una norma ISO que la hizo 45003. Y brevemente yo quería decir que Estrabula tiene que ver con México en varios momentos muy importantes. En el año de 2012 se eliminó del Reglamento General de Seguridad y Salud en el Trabajo la vigilancia en los centros de trabajo de los factores de riesgo psicosocial, ¿no? Y nosotros ya habíamos estado en contacto, varios de nosotros, con el grupo de WOPS en ICO, y el grupo de WOPS nos brindó su apoyo mandando algún documento a nuestras autoridades nacionales argumentando la importancia de que se reconociera estos factores y que se vigilaran y se previnieran, ¿no? O sea, por decreto se eliminaba el estrés laboral y todas estas presiones hicieron que ya en 2014 se publicara el reglamento y como ustedes saben, obliga a los patrones a prevenir estos factores de riesgo. Y parte de nuestro trabajo con la doctora Estragulas fue también pues el que se apoyó el que en México se realizara uno de los congresos del Comité WOPS de ICO en 2017, ¿no? Que yo digo que fue un buen congreso, nos divertimos bastante. Y la influencia de todo esto, pues actualmente está que en la norma 035 que se publicó en 2018 y que ella también ya tiene antecedentes. Entonces la autora pues nos ha apoyado mucho, claro, y todo el grupo de WOPS. Y pues le cedo la palabra a nuestra invitada. Muchas gracias.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very
So,
much.
yeah.
Is it okay if I share my screen and then we can start? Just a moment, please. Yeah.
Puede compartir
You
pantalla.
can.
I'm just trying to find it just a moment, please, if you don't mind. Yeah. So hopefully you can see my screen. Just a moment, go from the beginning, and then I will start. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this talk. I'm delighted to be here. And as in the introduction you heard, I have had the pleasure to work with some of you and to over the past years and to contribute to some of the policies that were developed in Mexico. And I was invited to talk about a recent report that was published last year that myself and my colleague, Professor Aditya Jain, who's at the University of Nottingham, developed for the European Trade Union Institute, which is a research institute of the European Commission. And the background to this project is that there is a lot of activity at the moment in the European Union around legislation on psychosocial risks and mental health at work. We have in the European Union what is called the Framework Directive on Occupational Safety and Health at Work that requires employers to assess and manage any type of risk to workers' health and safety and well-being. However, in this framework directive, we did not have direct reference to psychosocial risks, and we did not have direct reference to issues such as work-related stress. So what we have seen is that in many member states, and there are 27 at the moment of the European Union, some of the countries have gone beyond this framework directive, and they have introduced more specific legislation in this area. And we are about to publish a second report. Maybe we can present it in the future. It will be published, brought out around January, I think, or February next year. And in that report, we analyze and summarize exactly what kinds of policies and regulations exist in each of these countries. So the European Trade Union Institute, the European Trade Union Congress, which is the main representative body of workers across Europe, has been engaging, of course, in discussions with employers' associations and the European Commission around the possible development of a new directive that is specifically addressing psychosocial risks at work. And because there is so much happening in this area, what they wanted to do is to review existing knowledge and to see whether the concepts that we have been using for many years are still applicable, especially because we have changes in the nature of work. We have the huge impact of digitalization, automation, robotization in many countries that are affecting work in different contexts. But also, on the other hand, we have the increase in the gig economy, platform economy, and so we have a different kind of precarious work now, different forms of precarious work developing in many countries. And so they wanted to ascertain whether the conceptual frameworks that we have been using in this area are still relevant and can be used to capture also these issues. So it was supposed to be a review of the literature, but in that review, they wanted to look at not only the terms that have been used in the scientific literature and also in some of the key regulations around Europe. They also wanted to look at the typologies or the taxonomies of psychosocial risks that are used there. So what are the key dimensions of the psychosocial work environment? And then to see what kind of instruments are used, and again, how are they measuring these different dimensions? And then, of course, to identify good practices as concerns assessment, not only assessment, but also interventions. So in a nutshell, they pretty much asked us to do everything, to review everything that is out there in this area over the past years. So it was a very big project, and initially they had some ideas of doing a systematic literature review, but because they included all these different things and they started from the sources, the macro sources, this means not only on the workplace or organizational level, but also at the societal level, then looking at factors, and that means aspects of the work environment that are not necessarily negative, aspects generally that relate to work organization, employment conditions, and then hazards. What happens if some of these aspects are not as positive as we would like them to be? So issues such as job insecurity, for example, work-life conflict, etc., and then impacts and outcomes. So the broad questions that we used in this scoping review now, because it was too big, as I said, are how are work-related psychosocial risks defined in the literature? What are some key dimensions? And what are the impacts and outcomes and some interventions that we see that are evidence-based? And so this shows you actually what a big job this was, because we started with about 7,384, and that was just from the scientific literature. And then we added other sources as well that we identified. So we ended up with about 8,000 sources. And then after we screened the records and we excluded those that were not directly relevant, we ended up still, and that is very important here, because the literature on this in this area has become so big over the past years, we decided to only focus on systematic literature reviews. So in a way, on reviews, this was a review of reviews, umbrella reviews and meta-analysis. And even then, we ended up with about 800 scientific sources. And in addition to those, we also looked at the gray literature. That means key guidance that was developed for organizations, for example, like the ILO, the WHO, the European Commission, etc., and other key organizations who looked at standards that exist in this area as well. And we try to compare them in a systematic way and to analyze them to answer the questions that were posed by the European Trade Union Institute. And you can see the criteria that we used there on this slide. It finished in November 2023. In fact, at the moment, the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work has asked us to expand this review until now, because they're about to launch a campaign next year on psychosocialism and mental health at work. And they like to use this work and build on it in order to develop the materials for that campaign. But at the moment, what I'm presenting is the review until November 23. And of course, the criteria that we usually consider, but it was a mix. It was not only the scientific articles, it was also the reports and standards that are available in this area, as well as measurement instruments. We also, and I'll show you in a moment the results, but we also wanted to validate the results. So we had an advisory board that included experts not only across Europe, but also internationally. And Horatio was also part of that advisory board. And we sent the framework that we developed through this project of the psychosocial work environment, its determinants and its impact. We shared it also with expert networks through the European Academy of Occupational Health Psychology and also the International Commission on Occupational Health and its scientific committee that is active in this area on work organization and psychosocial factors. So experts reviewed this framework and we asked them to provide us feedback on whether it is clear, comprehensive, it is let's say, holistic enough to cover all employees, all sectors, all professions. And then on the basis of this feedback, we made some adjustments. And the overall sense was that it was, but it was some useful comments there to make it even more comprehensive. So, you can see here some logos of organizations. It's just to reiterate with the kind of reports that we analyzed. And you can see that they don't only come from Europe, but also internationally. For example, we analyzed guidance in Australia, also the OECD reports guidance from the US, and we compared them with the evidence that we found from the scientific evidence. And it was clear, and that report is quite long, and you can go and have a look at it, but it was clear that the taxonomy of psychosocial hazards that was developed by Tom Cox back in 1993, that involves 10 key dimensions of the psychosocial work environment, and was later adapted both in the Prima EF guidance that was published in 2008 and later on, is the one that is used very, very extensively. It has been incorporated not only into reports that have been published by different organizations, but into guidance and also into standards. For example, there you see reference on this slide to SLIC. SLIC is the Senior Labor Inspectors Committee in Europe. It's a pan-European body, and they have taken this taxonomy and they have developed guidelines for trade unions that are used in all the member states of the European Union. Also, it has been used by WHO and ILO, but also in national standards. BSI is the British Standardization Institute. So it was the first standard that was developed in this area in 2011. And then on the basis of that, it has been incorporated with slight adaptation in the Canadian national standard was developed in 2013 and ISO 45003 that was developed in 2021. So it is a taxonomy that has been very popular and used around the world. However, what we also found is that, of course, because we have had so many developments in terms of new employment contracts, digitalization, automation, AI, platform work, we didn't find a lot of the examples of what does it mean, for example, to not to have enough autonomy when you work in these kinds of environments, etc. We did not find a lot of these examples incorporated in these pieces of guidance. And I think this is an area, of course, that is developing. And so through the review that we did, we find more evidence around, for example, in-work poverty. So to work in occupations, but still not to be compensated well enough. Of course, algorithmic management, digital surveillance. We found issues such as rating systems, shifting workload from the different tasks that you do and the different jobs even that you do. Micro work, as it's called, that has to do again with the amount of control that you have over your tasks. Having a fragile professional identity or working in extreme conditions. Even more now evidence around working in unstable environments such as conflict zones and being more exposed to traumatic events. So what we did is we took all these different examples and evidence from the literature and we incorporated them into the 10 dimensions that Cox came up with in 1993 and have been so popular. So if you go into the report, you will see many, many examples that can be useful also for practice in this area. So the broad conceptual framework that we came up with, on the one hand, identifies the macro context that has an impact on the psychosocial work environment on the organizational level, and on the other hand, it identifies impacts. And you will find also a very, I would say, detailed review of the literature around the macro dimensions. And these include not only political dimensions, social dimensions, economic, but also now technological and ecological that capture these events such as global conflicts or national conflicts. And all these have an impact on the policy context at the national level. Labor market dynamics that relate also to the nature of work, to the characteristics of the workforce in any country and any sector, and the health and safety infrastructure. And all of this collectively has an impact on the psychosocial work environment. And you can see here the dimensions that from the Cox typology that, as I said, have been quite popular over the years, and then the different impacts. And in that report, we have all this, as I said, systematic reviews, meta-analysis that give you the evidence of not only the health impact at the individual level, but also organizational impact. And in some cases also effects that have a wider impact at the societal level. For example, disability pensions, the intention to retire. So it covers a lot of many different things and dimensions. So what I want to show you, because the 10 dimensions from Cox are very well known over the years, but these macro context dimensions have been covered less in this systematic way. So what I want to show you is a little bit more detail about what they include. So you can see here in the political context, I won't cover everything, but things like, of course, and I'm sure you will relate to this, the stable or unstable political system, the power relationships in the country. And we see, for example, nowadays, very real examples of that, and how they can have a dramatic effect on the psychosocial work environment. The social context that, interestingly enough, includes not only the social attitudes of people, but how they're represented in the media, how much civic engagement there is in this area, and how this is linked to the dialogue of the social partners. Trade union representation and density, and of course, as we know, in many countries, this has tended to suffer. And then, of course, as I was saying before, the demography of the workforce in terms of different characteristics. The economic context, of course, we know very well, issues around globalization, macroeconomic stability, the welfare state model that is there, and of course, labor market conditions. And then the technological aspects that I referred to before, that we see now on the rise more and more, and we don't have as many good evidence there because it's still developing. It's a very fluid area, but there is a lot of opportunity to look at some of these issues, both as in terms of possible negative impacts, but also in the sense of opportunities that they might present in this area. and the ecological context in terms of environmental conditions such as climate change and the safety and security of the environment in which organizations operate. And as I said, working in more and more conflict zones, unstable zones is something that we find more and more in the literature. And then as a knock-on effect, we have the different policies, health and safety policies, for example, or labor market policies, regulations, industrial relations. But not only that, issues, other policies such as social protection, economic, even and trade policies and environmental policies come into play and are shaped by these factors. But also you see here a list of different labor market dynamics that, of course, in the literature also are identified as the social determinants of health, of work and health, and then, of course, also infrastructure as well. And in the report, you will find also a discussion of the evidence on inspection around psychosocial risks as well, and what are some challenges that have been identified in different countries, and very particularly how even where we have good tools and good intentions, and because traditional inspection systems have focused more around the physical work environment, often inspectors, because you need a different type of inspection for these types of issues, are not comfortable, and they need much more skill development around this area. I'm not sure whether you know that the ILO has now developed 2 modules around inspection for psychosocial risks that you can find actually on the WHO website, and it's very interesting if you haven't seen them to take a look at them. Now, overall, what are the conclusions in terms of interventions? Well, we know that ideally, in any context of work, we want multimodal interventions, as we say. So interventions at different levels, but always with emphasis on prevention. However, because of the nature of studies, evidence is of variable quality, and especially when we talk about organizational level interventions, those that seek to tackle the sources of problems, let's say, of challenges in the way that work is organized and managed these organizations, it is getting a little bit more difficult to evaluate them. And in fact, most evaluation studies of interventions traditionally are based on medical models, such as randomized controlled trials. But these evaluation models do not capture the nuances of implementation of organizational level interventions. So we have found that other types of evaluation models, such as realist evaluation, for example, are much more appropriate for organizational settings. But unfortunately, we don't see them used across. We see more and more development through social sciences in this area, but not to the extent that we would like. And in fact, if you go and look at the WHO and ILO guidance on mental health at work that was published a few years ago, you will see that the conclusions that are drawn there in relation to interventions, I would say, are a little bit disappointing, and that is because, again, they're using the medical models of evaluation, and they're not looking them through this perspective more of social science. So there is more that needs to be done in this area. We also found that there is different types of guidance in relation to different types of psychosocial risks, and that is very encouraging. But organizations consistently struggle in this area, and they need more support. We have developed certain recommendations on interventions, so if you go in the report, you are able to see what does a healthy psychosocial work environment look like, first of all, but also what kinds of interventions have been out there and identified as good practice per each one of the 10 dimensions that the Cox taxonomy identifies. So we have summarized the evidence in the literature there. So we hope that this will be useful for people and for different countries, actually, and different sectors, that they can adapt these recommendations to their own realities. And last but not least, in the report, you will find an analysis of the situation in relation to regulation and policy at the European level. And that can be used to draw conclusions of the way forward. And as I was telling you earlier, there is a lot of discussion in this area in Europe. And we are actually working again with the trade unions, and there will be a report coming out in the new year that summarizes how many countries, for example, have reference to psychosocial risks, direct reference, how many countries define them, or they have specific obligations for employers, and the same for work-related stress and bullying, because usually bullying is captured not only through health and safety legislation, but other types of legislation such as anti-discrimination laws, for example. So we have given an overview, but there is more work to come that will be published over the years. And what we also intend to do is to use this conceptual framework and these dimensions to compare the legislation across countries and to draw conclusions, because what the unions are really interested in is how do they communicate with employers' associations, and even what sections or how a possible directive on psychosocial risk could look like, and how they should cover these different dimensions and these different aspects. So there's a lot of work to be done. Now, I should say that with the current political situation across the world and also in Europe, we have seen a lot of the focus has now moved towards security, defense. So unfortunately, we see also that it moves away from health promotion. A lot of the funding that is there available for research, for example, is diverted in other areas. So we do not know how soon we can see this sort of directive or legislation, psychosocial risk, materialize in Europe. But we feel that over the next possibly 2 to 3 years, hopefully we will see some movement. And we are working with a lot of organizations to make that a reality. The last thing that I will tell you so that you are aware for the future is, and I will show you the recommendation for research in a moment, is that the ILO actually is planning to publish a report next year, and it is the global report on health and safety that they bring out every April, I think the 28th of April every year, and it will be focusing on psychosocial risks and mental health at work. So we are helping currently the ILO to put together this global report, and in there you will also find evidence incorporated from this report that we did for the trade unions and recommendations for further research, policy and practice. So let's see a little bit around that. So what recommendations we provided for research? First of all, we saw that there is even systematic literature reviews, as you saw, there's so many out there. But we need more coordinated action to have meta reviews, as they're called. So reviewing the systematic literature reviews and better quality studies on the basis of the findings of these reviews. So we are lucky in Europe that we have consortia that are getting together, research consortia, and they're analyzing the evidence that exists. And they're bringing out guidelines. So that is a very good way forward. Of course, as I said before, we need more studies that are looking at psychosocial risks that arise from the changes in the nature of work, from new technologies, new practices, and their impact. And as I said, this is a very fluid field. We have seen some very good work that's coming out, but more is needed. Evaluation of intervention studies using the appropriate methodology beyond randomized controlled trials and medical models. We also need, and this is very important, more studies that look not only to negative impacts, but also positive outcomes. And, you know, one of the most famous theorists in this area is Robert Karasek. And Robert Karasek, if you remember, the job demands control model, for example, had the aspect of active jobs. And actually, not a lot of research was done in the area of active jobs. More was done on the negative impact of job strain, for example. So we have seen more studies now starting to look at the positive outcomes as well. I'll give you an example. We conducted a study looking at how a healthy psychosocial work environment can have an impact on innovative work behavior, innovation at work. And we find that indeed it can predict innovative behavior at the employee level, also at the organizational level, but even can predict innovation at country level, because in Europe we have all these wonderful surveys that are done, and we have a country innovation score. So we were able to link data at the European level and show that actually a healthy psychosocial work environment can also lead to country innovation. And that was a very powerful message for policymakers as well. So more studies in terms of positive outcomes, and more studies in terms of the macro context, especially addressing inequalities. And we know there are many gaps there. And it's very encouraging to see now more and more studies comparing legislation, looking at implementation of regulation, looking at other forms of policy, not only hard law, as we call it, but soft law, the development of standards. We did a follow-up study of ISO 45003 on psychosocial risk management with colleagues. And what we're now doing is developing some organizational case studies. And we're going to publish that as well next year, because if you know how standards are developed, they need to be updated every few years. So I think in about 2 years, we will start to look at the update of 45003. So we are engaging with organizations to see how it has been useful or not, and how we can improve it in the future. And of course, finally, studies that look at implementation of interventions, at enforcement, working with inspectors, for example, at the organizational level are important. We also brought out some recommendations for policy, and this is where the projects that I told you before have come out from. So we are currently analyzing legislation across countries. We are assessing their context, using the dimensions and the taxonomy that you will find in this report. And also we are developing case studies. Now, there are some case studies out there. The European Commission has done 2, as they call it, reviews, peer reviews, where they bring countries together, a certain number of countries. They did one in 2019, and they did another in 2024. So we have had 2 so far, where experts are writing case studies on their country, and there is an overall evaluation of what is happening in Europe as well. So we've had 2 of those, but now we are doing a more detailed report where we will also bring 10 case studies, because the point around this is to not only to see what the law says, but to learn lessons about the experience so far that different countries have had. We are lucky that we have had so many that have introduced legislation and other types of policies on this area, but we would like to see how these are implemented and how they can become better. And these lessons will be useful for the development of the directive, hopefully, on psychosocial risk in the future. The other thing that is very important is to strengthen social dialogue. And to strengthen social dialogue, what we have seen with our interaction with the trade unions, for example, is that it is very important to first develop competencies and awareness, because not everybody understands these concepts in the same way. So first we need to ensure that everybody's speaking more or less the same language, and then we can engage in more effective dialogue. We are lucky also in Europe that we have a lot of agreements at sectoral level, or generally across the employers and trade unions. We have had one on work-related stress in 2004, and another one on harassment and violence at work in 2007. So there are some reports that have been done to see the impact of these agreements, and as I said, also some studies on standards. But we need to do more, because now, and there is, I think, in Europe at the moment, not a lot of appetite towards regulation. Yes, there are these discussions around the directive, but at the same time, always employers are fighting any new regulation. So they're trying to see how we can come up with a more let's say, comprehensive policy framework, not only laws, but other types of policy as well. The discussion of legislation on psychosocial risks is already happening, as I told you, and it will continue, I think, for at least 1 or 2 years more, and see what the Commission will conclude on whether they will go forward with it. What is important is that whatever legislation is developed, it needs to take into account the macro context and all these different pressures and influences on the work environment, to really consider how best to implement such legislation. So it's not enough just to develop it, but it's important to understand the wider context and to develop, what I say there in the end, the appropriate infrastructure, because as I said, we have seen issues that relate to enforcement and inspection, and also we know that occupational health services that are provided in many countries, and in some of them are required by legislation as well, do not have a strong approach towards prevention. They're mostly reactive. So this is what we want to see. And we need to do more work to support them to be able to implement such an approach. And finally, we need to also make sure that we address the needs of the workforce and the dynamics of the workforce as they arise. And in different countries, that will mean something slightly different, but there are also issues, as I said, the trends that we see in the work environment that we need to ensure that we are addressing. And I would like to say also here that maybe an interesting seminar for the future. We are just finishing a project that we conducted in collaboration with the International Commission on Occupational Health that focused on occupational health services. So there we have developed case studies across 30 countries. And we have interviewed experts in these countries, and we have also run a global roundtable last month. And so we will bring in out a report and guidance on the future of occupational health services and how we can encourage them and support them to promote a preventative approach, not only for psychosocial risk, but across all types of issues at work. So that is another interesting report that will be published, I think, around May next year. And finally, for practice, of course, we need to develop different tools for stakeholders and appropriate training to develop competencies, promote existing tools, because, as I said, they do exist by the Senior Labor Inspectors Committee and the ILO, and this can be translated in different country contexts as well. Occupational health service provision needs the appropriate expertise for prevention, but also we need to systematize knowledge around interventions and ensure that we promote these multi-component comprehensive intervention models that again prioritize prevention in this area. I should also say that we did a study where we looked at data at the European level and linking the different data sets again. And we compared the perspective of employers with employees. And we did actually find that in those countries that have more specific legislation in this area, we do see more action at the organizational level. But unfortunately, we don't see a positive effect in addressing rather job demands in a way that reduces work-related stress. But we do see that organizations are reporting putting in place more resources. However, those resources were not found to be associated with, again, a reduction in work-related stress. So that was very interesting for us. Even data at that level tells a story. The story is that, yes, you can put regulation in place, but you need to do a lot of work to ensure that organizations understand what prevention means and understand what kinds of interventions they need to put in place in this area in order to have the required effects. That's why we see again in Europe, as I said, a big move towards a new campaign on psychosocial risk that would start next year, and more resources being put behind this area. So I think I covered a lot. I'd like to thank you for your attention. I would like to direct you to this report online, and I'm sure Horatio and the colleagues will also be able to do that. I'm very happy for you to get in touch with me, because there are all sorts of different issues and aspects that are covered in that report. And I'll be very happy to hear your feedback, and maybe how that can be useful in the Mexican context as well. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Dr. Leka. Sí, ahora podemos hacer quizá una ronda de unas 3 a 5 preguntas, si estás de acuerdo. You agree? Y si alguien de los invitados quisiera hacer una pregunta o algún comentario, por favor. Empezaríamos con, déjame ver, con la doctora Sara Hunda quiere hacer un comentario. Gracias.
Buenas tardes, México, buenas noches, Londres. Gracias por estar aquí, muy interesante el trabajo que nos presentas. A mí me parece que es muy necesario un montón de ideas que observo en tu exposición. Uno que, bueno, efectivamente ustedes realizan este trabajo tratando de abarcar la literatura internacional, aunque sí creo que sería muy importante, por lo menos en nuestros países, México y América Latina, tener una investigación similar que nos permita caracterizar adecuadamente cuáles son los cambios que se están desarrollando en el contexto de trabajo en nuestros países, las nuevas condiciones de riesgos psicosociales que se están presentando. Me refiero porque particularmente en todo el continente y en el mundo tenemos cambios importantes de lo que señalabas de la política internacional. La presencia de Trump como una política que está afectando al sector social, pero no solamente al sector social, a los trabajadores, a los migrantes trabajadores, donde uno de los riesgos es salir deportados o encarcelados en algún momento por su participación en el trabajo, que son nuevos riesgos que tú lo mencionabas como estar expuesto a situaciones terribles de exposición, y muchos de los países en Latinoamérica están teniendo grandes cambios en el trabajo, no solamente por la precarización de su trabajo como parte del trabajo informal, sino porque la mundialización, la internacionalización, lo que tú mencionabas, las nuevas formas de trabajo, las plataformas, pues están generando desigualdades importantes entre Europa y Latinoamérica. Nosotros seguimos siendo trabajadores que tienen condiciones más, bueno, no sé si más diferentes y bastante difíciles. Me parece muy, muy relevante porque esto lo he escuchado en muchos momentos y se ha venido retomando, evaluar también los aspectos positivos. Creo que eso nos ha faltado muchísimo, pero también este aspecto que hablas de las intervenciones. Es difícil porque las metodologías que forman en las universidades tienen que ver más con este modelo médico, con el modelo medicalista, y poco se ha abierto a la posibilidad de modelos de intervención realmente desde la perspectiva de las ciencias sociales. Es una discusión amplia porque en el ámbito de la ciencia que se dice dura y con evidencias resultados de evidencia científica, pues se reduce a un modelo medicalista y no a un modelo social de las ciencias sociales. Entonces, creo que sí sería muy importante el intercambio de este tipo de metodologías con este enfoque preventivo. Hay muchas dudas, particularmente para cómo hacerle. Creo que el camino es hacer más investigación. Este resultado del análisis sistemático, de la revisión sistemática, está muy interesante seguirlo como parte de complementar la investigación que ustedes hicieron e impulsar de manera, no sé, como tú dices, quizás a nivel internacional, campañas para mejorar o para evaluar desde la perspectiva de la prevención los factores de riesgo psicosocial. Muchas gracias.
Mm,
Thank you.
Dr. Leka, do you want to answer?
Yes, I will try. Because what happened is that my captions stopped working, so they appeared in Spanish. So I have tried and understood most of it, because when I read it,
Maybe you
yes,
try to change the.
I have been trying, yes. So for some reason it stopped translating for me, but I have understood what you said, I think. So
It's worth.
yes. So I think that if I understood you right, you raised a lot of issues there. That of course the political situation is very difficult, and it has a very big impact. And quite rightly, I mean, we have seen it directly in our area that with a Trump government in the US, for example, as you know, a lot of colleagues who are working on this area were fired. And we know, for example, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health in the US, we had a lot of colleagues working there, and you know, in a few days, they basically were fired, and a lot of expertise has been lost there. So we know that this is a big problem, and we have seen it in action, not only in the US, but in many countries, that it has a very negative effect. So that is one, and it's difficult to deal with these kinds of issues when the impact can be so pervasive, I would say. At the same time, I think it's important to take into consideration these aspects, because I think they can have a very big impact on the work environment. And you touched upon things such as the precarious work, platform work. We see the impact and the increase in self-employment. Now, I should say also that in Europe, what we have seen, and in some countries that try, in other countries, is that how do you capture and you cover in legislation these types of workers as well? Because a lot of big employers, for example, they don't want them to be covered in legislation, so they remain outside of legal protection. But what we have seen in Europe, we have a directive on platform work, and that was important that they managed to come to agreement. And also we have had now more recently a legal act on artificial intelligence, and that was also interesting, because a lot of work now, workers we see lose control, and everything is controlled through algorithmic management. Algorithms are telling people what to do and how to sequence the job. So there are some good developments there, but more work needs to be done in this area. And I heard also you referring again to the medical model of evaluation of interventions, and that is a problem, I would say. So there are a lot of other nice models that we can learn from. But we need to make sure that in order to capture the reality in organizations, because when we try sometimes to put in place interventions that have to do with the way work is organized, and I remember from my own experience when I was a student, and I know Carlos, for example, can tell us about his experience, when I went and told employees, you know, this is what healthy and good work is, And they were telling, well, you won't tell me how to manage my staff. You are entering into an industrial relations territory there. The employers, a good employer will listen, but not everybody is a good employer, right? And sometimes you cannot get the message across. So they feel like you are entering in management territory. When we developed the Prima EF model many years ago, it is a story I've told many of you who have interacted before. I was invited to do a presentation at the Institute of Risk Management in London. That Institute of Risk Management is usually around financial risk. It's about money. So I was very impressed that they called me there. I said, oh, okay. So they want to hear about psychosocial risk as a very big development. But it turns out that it was only 2 or 3 people who had an open mind. So when I did my presentation, the room was probably the most hostile room that I have faced. So a lot of these people turned against me and said, oh, you cannot tell managers how to manage. We know better how to lead our organizations. And all I was trying to say, of course, is this is what healthy work looks like. And, just to share some experiences. So that was interesting. But yes, multimodal interventions are where we want to progress and to support organizations. And also that important point about not only looking at negative outcomes, but positive outcomes, because employers always like the positive story, and the positive story opens doors. The negative story doesn't necessarily open doors. And this is sometimes what I've told my students, when they want to go and get data from organizations. And, nowadays don't talk necessarily about work-related stress, you talk about well-being at work, right? So the language can be tailored to address, to open doors, to make sure that the people react to us and they listen. And that's what we've tried to do now through different pieces of guidance as well. Now I will try and see, Horatio, if my captions work again. So do you want to try it?
Okay, we can try it. It's fine. It's
So
in
in
Spanish.
English, but say something in Spanish so that we can see.
Bueno, seguiría en su turno de intervención el maestro Carlos Esquivel, ¿no? ¿Es en English?
No,
Yeah.
it turns, yeah, it does not work, my translation, but again, if I read it, I can understand a lot of it.
How is your speaking language English and caption Spanish? Or
Okay, try again.
maybe you try speaking English, Spanish, and caption language English.
Okay.
It should say English, English.
Or English, English?
English.
Yes.
Okay, fine. I'll do that.
Well,
Let's see. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's why
Bueno,
the
a ver,
questions are coming
el maestro Carlos, a ver.
in Spanish.
Okay, it works. Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Entonces, voy a hacer mi pregunta en español. Tú me dices si lo estás leyendo bien. Y yo quería decir, aunado al comentario que nos hace la doctora Sara, es preocupante el crecimiento de la ultraderecha en el mundo y junto con la ultraderecha las políticas de desregulación del trabajo. Pero además de ello, se acompaña de una narrativa en la práctica en las organizaciones de el descrédito a la evidencia científica. Una forma de poder ver esto está en la película No mires arriba, ¿no? Que, bueno, pues en la película nos muestran muy bien cómo, bueno, pues el marketing puede hacer que la gente, aún teniendo la evidencia de que algo terrible puede estar por ocurrir, bueno, pues prefieren hablar de las cosas que son buena onda, ¿no? En México, nosotros tenemos la experiencia ahora de que efectivamente hay bueno, pues un estándar, nuestra norma de riesgos psicosociales, y esto ha hecho que muchas empresas empiecen a ejercer más presupuesto para controlar los riesgos psicosociales. Pero como acabas de decir, ocupando el concepto de bienestar en el trabajo, hay empresas que, por ejemplo, em, contratan dar smoothies con proteína porque eso es bienestar, ¿no? Y con eso controlan el riesgo psicosocial. Hacen intervenciones con ángeles porque eso habla del bienestar espiritual de la gente y a eso le traducen como riesgo psicosocial. Hacen, bueno, pues muchos de estos tipos de intervención que si bien en la industria del bienestar puede ser que tienen su espacio, en el ámbito de la gestión del riesgo psicosocial, pues no estoy tan seguro. Me sorprende además en tu informe ver que no están incluidos en la evidencia científica. Entonces, además de, pues por supuesto, hacer políticas que estén basadas en evidencia científica, ¿cómo podemos hacer para transmitir en las organizaciones que, bueno, pues por mucho que a través de las redes sociales o las estrategias de marketing que estas empresas ocupan, se adopten medidas que sabemos que pueden funcionar? Este tipo de informes pueden ayudar mucho, pero con el crecimiento de todas estas narrativas de la individualización de los efectos, ¿qué estrategias podríamos seguir para que las empresas entiendan que las intervenciones multinivel de política organizacional y por último individual son las que deberían de estarse ocupando en las organizaciones?
Mhm. Okay, yeah. So I should say that now that we are engaging even with colleagues for the update of the international standard that I mentioned before, or ISO 45003, we interact with people and experts around the world, and there has been a very big debate around whether we should include, for example, well-being in the standard. We did include it as an outcome, but they often confuse it with wellness, exactly as what you said there, Carlos. So wellness in the literature mostly refers to health promotion, mostly refers to individual level interventions. Well-being is a more, let's say, comprehensive concept. It's not about health promotion alone. It's about prevention, and also looking at the organizational level and also individual level interventions, but a more comprehensive approach. But as you say, even in contexts where a lot of regulation exists, and a lot of efforts, a lot of money has been put, like in Europe, for example, we have had so much money put in this area. We don't see the desired outcomes, less so in countries that are new in terms of developing policies in this area. So how do you convince employers? Yeah, how do you convince even policymakers, especially where the context might be, let's say, a little bit hostile in some countries? And yes, they can attack evidence, and they can attack experts as well directly. I mean, I'll tell you an example. When we brought out that study that I told you, that we showed that when you link the data, it shows that employers are putting in place interventions at the individual level, as it seems, because we don't see the desired effects in reduction of work-related stress. It was very interesting because the same scientific paper was taken by trade unions. It was reported as it was, but when it was taken by employers, it was reported in a completely different way. Like it was saying that individual level interventions are fine and they are working. And I didn't know about this, that it was in some report that was produced and it had been translated into this way. So somebody that knew me got in touch and said, "Did you know that your research says this?" I said, "No, it doesn't." "Oh, well, but the employer said it does." So it's very interesting how the message sometimes people will hear what they want to hear. So how do we make them understand? I think what I have always said from day one is, because employers, when they hear the term, even psychosocial risk, they become very scared. It's a scary term. Psychosocial risk management is about good management. period. So I think the message needs to be that an organization cannot be successful, it cannot be sustainable unless they ensure that the conditions, they create a healthy work environment, good working conditions where people can be not only healthy, but also productive, contributing, let's say, thriving, there is a word that is used in digital literature, because that will have good effects for the organization as well. So I think we need to change the way that we talk about things a little bit. And remember, I talked about Karasek before that, and he, in fact, we were in a meeting, and he said, you know what the biggest mistake I made is that I did not put more focus on active jobs. I only talked about job strain and negative outcomes. We should have also put a lot of focus on the positive outcomes. And the same from Johannes Sigris when he talked about the effort record imbalance model, that he should have talked more about the post. So I think a lot of it has to do with the way we communicate. That will not solve all problems in all contexts, because if it was the case that everybody had good intentions, there will be no inequalities and there will be no exploitation as well. But unfortunately, it does exist. So we can only try and do as much as we can. But I think we have to keep trying, and we have to tailor the message in a way that makes sense to different stakeholders. But having said that, because everybody talks about the business case, I don't like the term business case. I like the term value case, because value is not only about money, it's about ethics, and it's about doing also the right thing. So I think we should put more focus on that.
Gracias.
Gracias. No sé si, doctora Straula, tenemos otras dos preguntas, ¿está bien? Dos ponentes más. Two people more. Questions?
Now I see that it has turned again to, yes, that's fine. I see again that my captions, let's try again to see if it works. I don't know what it goes
Sí,
back to.
tenemos dos otros ponentes que quieren hacer preguntas. Two people.
Yeah, that's fine. We can answer, yeah.
Dos personas más. ¿Sí? Bueno, entonces tiene la palabra la doctora Juana Patlán.
Ok, espero que sí me escuche, ahí me escuchan.
Sí.
Yes.
Bueno, gracias por todo lo que nos compartes, muchas gracias, es muy bueno. Sí necesitamos información más homogénea, ¿verdad? Una clasificación, una taxonomía o una serie de dimensiones que pudiéramos irlas incorporando más homogéneas para hacer estudios comparativos a nivel internacional. Me llama la atención algo que quisiera comentar. En el año de 1994, presenté una ponencia donde sustentaba yo la necesidad de estudiar los cambios que tiene el trabajo. El trabajo está cambiando continuamente. Y creo yo que los profesionales de la salud ocupacional deben de estar indagando, revisando, actualizándose para identificar esos factores que yo al inicio decía que eran del puesto del trabajo, del entorno laboral y de la organización. Pero me sorprende hoy ver que se reconozca, que lo reconoces, ver factores extraorganizacionales, extra que son pues la situación política, la situación económica, la situación social, cultural. Yo creo que tenemos que tener esa visión amplia de poder ver nosotros le llamamos como macrocontexto o macroentorno, donde están las empresas y también los factores que están en las empresas. Y bueno, gracias por tus aportaciones y yo creo que los profesionales de la salud ocupacional pues deben de estar al día de estos cambios del trabajo y de estos factores que van a estar presionando al trabajador, a su salud y a las mismas empresas. Eso quería comentar. Muchas gracias.
Mm, yes, no, you're absolutely right. And that's why we did bring this macro context also into the report, because we think that it is important that there is a more understanding about how these macro factors have a pervasive impact on the workplace as well. Not only the workplace, but also on the workforce, the working conditions, broadly speaking, and how much can be achieved. So it's absolutely important. And occupational health experts and professionals, again, they need to adapt their knowledge and competencies to be able to understand how best to respond to these challenges and to support organizations and employees themselves. Unfortunately, we do not see the skills or the competences that we would like to see. For example, with this project we did on occupational health services, we did find that unfortunately the perspective is still in most countries very medical still. It is mostly around occupational physicians, occupational nurses, yes, safety engineers, but this sort of comprehensive approach to occupational health services, multidisciplinary approach, is lacking in many countries. And even in countries where they have, let's say, invested a lot in this area, we still don't see the focus and the competencies to be where we want it to be. So this is a key area, and you will see in these guidelines that will be brought next year that it's a key area that we need to address. So yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for your comment.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question, la doctora Xochiquetzal, si puede comentar.
Gracias. Buenas tardes. Muy interesante la presentación. Me hace mucho sentido. Yo soy médico, también soy psicóloga y estoy dentro de las empresas trabajando face to face con los colaboradores, con los líderes también. Y obvio, hoy que leo y escucho esta parte del impacto social o de la responsabilidad desde la sociología para la implementación de la prevención de los factores psicosociales, pues me hace todo el sentido, ¿no? Pienso en, sí, efectivamente requerimos estas políticas globales y nacionales para que las cosas se hagan legales. Sin embargo, para aquellos que estamos en el día a día con los colaboradores, con los equipos de liderazgo en Petit Comité, pues nos damos cuenta de que de pronto se usan justamente estas estrategias que menciona Carlos, ¿no? De mindfulness, de a lo mejor team buildings y estas situaciones un poco para calmar el estrés del colaborador. Entonces, lo que he visto es que sí es importante desde el origen, desde los trabajadores, desde el liderazgo tal vez más cercano al colaborador, trabajar en la salud mental para que desde ahí emerja las relaciones positivas, para que se elimine la interferencia trabajo-familia, para que los líderes locales respeten el derecho psicosocial del colaborador. Y bueno, creo que sería maravilloso que las políticas globales y nacionales empujen más en esto. Sin embargo, desde nuestra realidad en el día a día, ¿qué considera usted que fuera bueno que nosotros, como los que estamos en primera línea con ellos, podamos investigar, trabajar o contribuir desde el uno a uno, desde los grupos pequeños o desde las empresas pequeñas que al final de poco en poco pueden empujar hacia arriba, ¿no? Pienso, por ejemplo, en si yo tengo como cliente a una empresa con 250 colaboradores y a otra con 100 colaboradores y a otra con 300 colaboradores, y empezamos desde adentro, más bien hacia afuera, a permear una cultura organizacional, una cultura individual, ¿cómo considera usted que pudiéramos aportar de alguna forma, no desde el macro, porque para nosotros es imposible, sino desde el micro, desde adentro, para favorecer esto? No sé, me gustaría saber su opinión.
Okay. Yes. Well, first of all, yeah. Okay. You touched upon very interesting issues there, and of course, the reality is very different in different sizes organizations as well, as you said, and the context of organizations plays a role. So yes, it is the experience that's why I said that we need interventions that are multimodal. We always strive for prevention. What I usually tell people is that, yes, of course, individual level interventions like the ones you mentioned can be very useful, but if the individual keeps returning to conditions at work that are unmanageable and they put their health and safety and well-being at risk, then it becomes in the long term more difficult for these kinds of approaches to have a sustainable effect. So that is a problem. So we need to have a multi-level, a multi-modal perspective around the interventions. What you can do on the ground. So I think there are many things that can be done, and a lot of things sometimes come from the workforce themselves, because we see that sometimes, as I said, employers might not want to do the right thing. Okay, so what else can we do? So what we have seen in different contexts is that people can have a voice, get more organized so that there is a voice in the workplace. They can work with if they exist, certain departments, such as human resources, for example, or health and safety, to try and raise these issues in the way that the employer will pay attention. If these issues, you see that they have an impact on business outcomes, such as productivity, such as sickness absence, such as accidents, depending on where it's important to identify and bring out the link with these kinds of issues, because then employers will pay attention. I'll give you an example. When we were working in construction or in mining and in oil and gas industry, everything was safety, safety, safety. It's a very macho culture. Nobody wanted to talk about psychosocial risk and work-related stress until there was a very enlightened engineer there, head engineer, who wanted to prove that actually near misses for accidents, where you just about near miss a very big accident, was actually related more to people factors rather than technical factors, which we know is true. And so when they managed to prove that, then the leaders paid attention, because they found that that was the most reliable predictor of near misses in the workplace. So you need to find the evidence and to hook it to the right data to make employers respond, while at the same time trying to get people to, if possible, to have more of a voice. If that does not work, of course, you try and provide support. And there are those professions also where things cannot change. Maybe there are professions that there's a lot of trauma, for example, in the job. There we try, as we say, to increase individual resilience. Don't love this word, but individual resources to be able to respond to the work situation. I hope that has been useful.
Sí, muchas gracias, muchas gracias.
¿Alguna otra comentario breve?
Hay una en el chat de Marlene. No sé si.
Sí. Strabula, can you read one?
Let me see.
In the chat, thank you for the presentation. It was useful. It was full of ideas and reflection. My reflection is how to make interventions with workers in precarious conditions and with employers who have no interest in mental health.
Yeah, that is the most difficult question. Yes, it is the most difficult question. Yeah, it will. I should say that even if we have the best intentions, as I said before, in some contexts, unfortunately, even we might not get the results no matter how hard we try. But again, if it is a precarious condition, again, it means that the employer will see their workers as something that can be replaced very easily. And in contexts where also we have a lot of stigma around mental health, they will not be wanting to be open and discuss this kind of issue or find solutions. So it all depends on where you find yourself. But I think sometimes you have to, as I said, try and speak the language that they will understand. And I think Carlos is able, he has some very good examples on how to do that. So how in workplaces, even where there is zero awareness, let's say, there will usually still be a situation in the workplace that can open a door by, let's say, around the problem at work. How do you resolve the problem? Or how do you help the employer become more successful? So I think this point that I was making around the message, and the message will be different in different contexts, is very, very important. It requires a lot of creativity, but at least this is what me and my students have found very useful in these situations. So you need to understand the context and you need to tailor your message. Carlos, I think maybe you want to give an example.
Sí,
Sí,
bueno, muy
ver.
rápido, ¿no? Muy rápido. Respecto de la pregunta de la doctora Xochiquetzal, me gustaría comentarle que en la página 115 del informe que nos presenta la doctora Stabrula, establece que mindfulness es una intervención que tiene un efecto positivo inmediato, pero que en el seguimiento, es decir, después de un tiempo, va perdiendo efecto. Quizás para poderlo explicar como, bueno, pues en una terminología médica, podríamos hablar de resistencia al tratamiento, ¿no? Entonces, tener estas herramientas, a mí un ejemplo que aquí están varios de mis estudiantes, así que ellos pueden decir que esto es verdad. A mí un ejemplo que me gusta poner es que si uno insiste en las intervenciones individuales, quien va a ganar es el que lo vende, va a ganar dinero, pero el empleador no va a ver un efecto en sus trabajadores en el long term, en el término a largo plazo. En el corto plazo sí, pero lo que nos está dando es una oportunidad de cambiar las condiciones. Entonces a ese fenómeno la doctora Leka le llama en otro informe, que es el Best Practice Intervention, en el que llama que hay que preparar a las organizaciones para el cambio. Y es una forma, ¿no? Pero bueno, respecto de trabajar con trabajadores que no tienen idea de lo que es la salud mental, bueno, pues ya muchos saben que mi investigación que estoy haciendo en La Lagunilla es un caso importante ver que los trabajadores siempre saben que hay una cosa que es la salud mental. Entonces, no siempre saben que así se llama. Así que hay que nombrarla de la forma en la que ellos lo saben. Hay veces que ellos dicen que les da cosa, o que de repente les dan unas ganas de salir a tomarse 10 caguamas en ese momento. Y eso es, ¿no? Hablarles de los síntomas, hablarles de los efectos de la salud mental y desde ahí se puede entrar. También otra forma, bueno, eso después platicamos. Pero otra forma es hablarles de lo que les motiva. Entonces, en la población que yo estoy trabajando, una cosa que les motiva mucho es no ser percibidos como menos. Así que a ellos les digan que no piensan en la salud mental les ofende un poco. Entonces, pues eso, nada más.
Ok, quiero nada más comentar algo. Yo pienso que es muy importante no olvidar el nivel macro y pondría un ejemplo, ¿no? Que lo hemos propuesto muchas veces a las autoridades de salud y de trabajo, ¿no? Recientemente propuse nuevamente que se hiciera una campaña para promoción de la salud mental en el trabajo, ¿no? porque por parte de la autoridad, ¿no? Porque si la autoridad no presenta hacia la sociedad una evidencia de que es importante este tópico, porque vamos a reuniones con empresas y en todas sale como uno de los principales problemas, los problemas de salud mental, por trabajo o por otras causas, pero es un problema que está ahí. Y en el caso particular de México, no hay ningún pronunciamiento, una política, ¿no? Que se pudiera hacer un convenio de los diferentes interesados eh, para, digamos, coordinar actividades que promuevan la salud mental. Entonces, eso yo creo que se puede hacer y es algo en lo que quisiera trabajar mucho el año que entra y ver si podemos ir impulsando de alguna manera una campaña de ese tipo, como tienen en el Reino Unido, ¿no? Ellos tienen su campaña permanente de mind work, por ejemplo, ¿no? Que he visto. Y eso no tenemos algo aquí, ¿no? Entonces, eso no lo dejemos, ¿no? De lado porque sino en pequeñas empresas y medianas, pues no va a llegar tampoco el mensaje, ¿no? Digamos, como que hay que llevarlo por diferentes lados. Es una opinión, pero muchas gracias. Y no sé si Estrabula ya tiene que ir a dormir y vamos despidiendo.
La estamos estresando.
Bueno, un último mensaje, Estrabula, ¿algo quisieras comentar?
So I think there's a problem with your captions now. Because I can see everybody else is in English, but apart from you, Horatio. But as I said, I can read. I don't have any other comments. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments.
No,
Because I tried to catch what you were saying, but yeah.
Okay. Well, technology,
Technology, yes, yes.
Tecnostress, dice.
Tecnostress, yes.
Pues muchas gracias, estimada Estrabula, y
Of
nos
course.
veremos pronto en
See you at Ho Chi Minh.
Yes, see you soon. I saw your name there,
Soon.
so it will be
Yeah.
great to connect to see you again.
Thank you.
See
Thank
there.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Si quieren, podemos mantenernos nosotros un momentito para algún otro comentario. Tenemos 15 minutos antes de que cierre la sesión y pues alguien que quisiera comentar, nuestro estimado Idier o algún otro, Enrique Pintor, algunos otros de los asistentes. Nada más les comentaré, la idea de esta sesión está presentada esta nueva forma propuesta de conceptualizar los factores de riesgo psicosocial y nosotros estamos, bueno, en un proceso quizá de mejora de nuestra normatividad nacional y pensé que era conveniente, pues, activarnos, ¿no? No quedarnos con la misma modelo y ver qué más meter. Entonces, era un poco la idea, hay que leer el documento completo. Pero experiencias como la de IBIER, que de un país que tiene mucho más desarrollo en esto que
Ok.
nosotros, pues sería muy útil, ¿no? Si
Vale,
pudieras.
Horacio. Primero,
Gracias.
gracias por invitarme al espacio. Muy interesante. Te cuento un poco brevemente. Actualmente estoy con el Ministerio del Trabajo en la actualización del manual de calificación de pérdida de capacidad laboral en todo el tema mental, dolor y neurológico, que luego les puedo platicar, que eso ya terminamos en un mes de proyecto. Viene una actualización sobre todo el tema de cómo calificar la pérdida de capacidad mental o el impacto, digamos, de no solamente el trabajo, sino de origen común en la enfermedad mental. Con respecto a lo que la doctora Strubola comentaba, nosotros tenemos una larga tradición normativa en el tema de factores de riesgo psicosocial desde el año 84 y contamos con herramientas de medición desde el año 2010. Y a ver, ¿qué ve uno? El tema de factores de riesgo psicosocial está en la agenda, digamos, ya de empresarios. Hablo incluso de sus representantes, porque recientemente con la ayuda de OIT, la regional de Lima, que pertenece a Colombia, y los empresarios de Colombia, la gremiación, se hizo un estudio que lo dirigí yo sobre el impacto en temas de productividad y costos de la enfermedad mental en el país. Entonces, llamó la atención que lo hayan movilizado los empresarios, sean los que se hayan movilizado interesados por el tema, por la alta prevalencia que está teniendo el tema de la enfermedad mental, no únicamente la de origen laboral, sino en general la enfermedad mental sobre los contextos laborales. Pero coincido con la doctora en un tema, y es que si bien se ha hecho mucha evaluación, aquí la evaluación de riesgos psicosociales es un tema muy usual, en las estrategias de intervención sigue privilegiándose unos enfoques individuales y sobre las respuestas negativas de las personas. Muchos promovidos por una falta de fundamentación y comprensión, y otros, como lo decía el maestro Carlos, que también privilegia, digamos, a quien hace la intervención sin cuidar mucho realmente si se controla el factor de riesgo, más centrado en el efecto y con una visión muy individual. Yo diría que los cambios, es decir, en las causas principales de los factores de riesgo, como ella decía, que hay que ser una buena administración en general, todavía tienen retos grandes en nuestro país, como digo, a pesar de que es un tema súper actualizado, no solamente en el ámbito técnico, sino a nivel directivo y de grandes empresarios del país. Pero la intervención sigue chocando con un modelo muy centrado en la productividad y pensando que es un problema más de la persona y menos de el modelo productivo, el modelo de organización. Pero creo que ha habido avances a pesar de todo. Estamos actualizando también la instrumentación y yo creo que muy lamentablemente el tema de la prevalencia de la enfermedad mental en nuestro país no va a disminuir por problemas del sistema, problemas de oportunidad en el acceso y en resumen nuestro sistema de seguridad social tiene mucho para el trabajo de intervención secundaria y poco en atención primaria, tanto en la promoción como en la prevención. Y eso es un problema porque finalmente se está manejando es la patología y con un enfoque muy biomédico, es decir, inicia por medicina general, va a atención secundaria por psiquiatría y la atención por psicología son 8 sesiones por año con un intervalo de mes y medio en eso, o 2 meses en cada sesión, lo cual sabemos que es poco adecuado. Y el principal manejo, pues obviamente de entrada, benzodiazepinas y todos los inhibidores de la captación de la serotonina, y eso realmente tiene bastantes dificultades. Pero bueno, luego puedo ampliarme más para no tomar mucho tiempo, pero les cuento que aún así les digo, el tema se ha posicionado bastante en el medio y ya no solamente en medios académicos, sino de otro tipo.
Muy bien, gracias, Miguel. ¿Alguien quisiera hacer comentarios sobre la ponencia de la doctora? Marlene, ¿sí? Sí, por
Sí,
favor.
sí, hace rato no tenía activado el audio, pero ya al final sí se me activó el audio, pero ya éramos muchos. Bueno, a mí algo que se me hizo muy interesante fue esta revisión sistemática. El pesar que tengo es que solo está NIOSH como parte de las revisiones teóricas. Y algo que decía Sara es que de Latinoamérica no tenemos esta visión porque, como decía Carlos, en una revisión ellos inician con literatura gris. Entonces, en la literatura gris nos permite ver el origen de las categorías, las implicaciones en términos de la salud y de la organización, pero en Latinoamérica tenemos realidades muy distintas. Y Dier, colombiano, que lo conocemos de hace muchos años, conocemos su norma, conocemos incluso documentos que están publicados sobre el proceso que hacen Él ha venido a México a platicarnos cómo hacen este proceso y ya tiene una buena cantidad de años de experiencia y aún así hay problemas en la intervención. En México, aun cuando tenemos como estandarte normativo, digamos que en términos internacionales, la ISO 45001, la ISO 45002 y ahora la ISO 45003, tenemos la norma 030, tenemos el reglamento federal, tenemos la norma 030, la norma 035 y las que se van añadiendo, aún el tema de las intervenciones sigue siendo un problema. Por ejemplo, en la ISO que lidera Estrabula, habla de los 3 niveles básicos de intervención, primaria, secundaria y terciaria. En México es difícil hacer intervención primaria. ¿Por qué? Porque tenemos que ir al origen del problema y en las empresas que tenemos, en las que tenemos acceso, porque las grandototas es difícil tener acceso y ver datos de estas empresas multi o trans, es difícil. Lo que vemos es que el origen de la mayoría de los efectos visibles, no solo los que la norma 035 dice, sino hay una cantidad de efectos que no están documentados incluso, no están en la tabla de enfermedades mentales. Vemos que el origen está en la forma en cómo se trabaja, la falta de insumos, la velocidad de la operación, la enfermedad no psiquiátrica, la enfermedad y diabetes, hipertensión, grasa en la sangre y añadido a la pobreza en general de la población, el acceso tan largo o tan distante de los hogares que tienen las familias, el mantener 2 jornadas laborales o la llamada triple jornada se convierte en, diría, un caldo de cultivo para hacer complejas las intervenciones. Yo no digo que las empresas tendrán que resolver todo porque es imposible. ¿Qué dicen las empresas? Pongo camiones. Muy bien, eso es fantástico. Permiten que personas que vienen de 2 horas de camino sea muy accesible el trayecto, pero las horas anteriores que tienen que levantarse a las 3:30 de la mañana, 4:30 de la mañana, desplazarse a un sitio específico, ver quién se queda con los hijos o con los adultos mayores o con las personas en casa o incluso con las mascotas, porque también ya es un tema que no se ha hablado, pero que se incluye. ¿Qué hago con esos aspectos? Entonces, las intervenciones son complejas. Uno siempre dice la recomendación, hay que hacer intervenciones mixtas. Lo que nosotros tenemos como experiencia es que si no hay detrás un aparato regulador obligatorio en las intervenciones, la gente abandona las intervenciones. Cuando es de buena voluntad, se abandona. Hemos tenido casos que tenemos 30 sujetos y ya decimos son muchos. Me acuerdo una vez que IDIAR nos presentó un documento con 600 y tantos sujetos. Yo dije, ay, Dios mío, espérame, ¿600 de dónde, no? Y bueno, nos hemos quedado con 2 participantes, con 5 participantes, con 8 participantes cuando nos va bien para poder hacer un análisis de antes y después. Digo, nosotros nos hemos quedado hasta con 14, pero para que vean que son altos. Entonces, sí estamos en un dilema de cómo hacer para involucrar de arriba hacia abajo y de abajo hacia arriba, porque la realidad es que hay empresas que sí han querido implementar, me acuerdo de una de electrodomésticos que hizo cambios fenomenales, cambió sistemas ergonómicos, le preguntó a la gente cómo resolver problemas. La pregunta es, a la larga, ¿cuáles fueron los beneficios para la calidad de vida en el trabajo, la incidencia de enfermedades que ya sabemos que, por ejemplo, en Japón, una responsabilidad que hay de las empresas es que si tu trabajador tiene diabetes o tiene hipertensión, es tu responsabilidad gestionar las condiciones de trabajo que ayuden a que ese trabajador tome buenas decisiones. Bueno, en México se siguen poniendo dispositivos de golosinas, que ya sabemos, ¿no?, qué tipo de golosinas se venden, por un incentivo económico para la empresa. Entonces, la verdad es que abordarlo no es fácil. Creo que debemos empezar a lo mejor por esta visión de una revisión sistemática en Latinoamérica. Las evidencias, algo muy interesante que se me hizo, la evidencia de casos exitosos, bajo qué contextos, entenderlo, porque no nos vamos a centrar solamente en lo negativo, también hay aspectos positivos y creo que tanto abordar lo negativo, que tenemos ya mucho, como vislumbrar lo positivo, ayudaría como evidencia no solo en México, sino en América Latina, a construir una visión para nuestro entorno, que no son iguales, pero se parecen. Entonces, bueno, esa es mi opinión. Gracias.
Tendríamos para una breve intervención de 2, 3 minutos. ¿Alguien más quisiera? ¿No? Bueno, si no hubiera, yo sí retomaría. Creo que sí se debería, lo hemos comentado, ¿no? Ver cómo estructurar una campaña involucrando empresas, al Estado, en desarrollar, digamos, toda una imagen de que es importante prevenir la salud mental, los problemas de salud mental asociados con el trabajo, ¿no? Y eso yo creo que podría servir también para justificar lo que se haga en lo micro, en el centro de trabajo y en lo individual, ¿no? Eso podría ser. Bueno, Polinar, ¿querías una intervención breve? Ujú. Sí, Polo.
No estoy seguro que tenga abierto el micrófono. No puedo abrir el
Bueno,
micrófono.
yo lo habilité. Pero es que como se les cae luego el internet, se
Sí,
vuelve a desconectar.
creo que ya puedes, Polo. Ya te habilitó, ya lo puedes abrir. Ya
Ah, ok,
está.
gracias. Sobre lo que comentabas, Carlos, de esta parte de los ángeles, ¿funcionan?
No, pues por supuesto que no. Lo que pasa es que a través de la unidad de inspección que nosotros tenemos oportunidad de revisar cuáles fueron las inspecciones que hicieron, cuáles fueron las intervenciones que hicieron las organizaciones. Entonces, una de las cosas que nosotros encontramos, que me parece que es la más grotesca que hemos visto, es que hubo una consultora que le vendió a una organización que la intervención le iba a hacer con ángeles y que le iba a preguntar a los trabajadores cuál era el ángel con el que se identificaban para que a través de ese y de la oración pudieran gestionar su estrés. Entonces, bueno, o sea, de ese tipo de cosas hemos encontrado algunas y bueno, pues deben tener fundamento, eso es una cosa que hemos estado presentando últimamente, deben tener fundamento por lo menos teórico. Debe haber congruencia teórica entre lo que uno va a hacer y algo que asumir que funciona, pero no, no tiene nada que ver una cosa con la otra. Y además la norma es de riesgos psicosociales, ni siquiera es de gestión del estrés. Entonces, ¿quién sabe si los ángeles sirvan para gestionar el estrés? Eso no lo sabemos.
Ya me
Pero,
estaba emocionando, iba a
sí, pues
empezar
yo
a
dije.
orarle a mi ángel de la guarda. Ok, muchas gracias.
Bueno, ya como anécdota está bueno.
Yo,
¿Alguna
yo sí,
otra comentario
un
final?
último comentario,
Sí,
Horacio,
por
sobre
favor.
esto. Yo trabajo principalmente, bueno, en todo lo que llevamos trabajando con mi equipo ha sido con gran empresa. Con gran empresa estamos hablando de 10.000, 15.000, 20.000. Ahora estamos llegando como, entre tres empresas, estamos trabajando como con 60.000 personas. Y ¿qué ha funcionado? O sea, como para compartir buenas prácticas. ¿Cómo hemos logrado que una empresa grande, una multinacional que incluso tiene operación ahí en su país, se involucre en el asunto? El top-down es clave, es decir, no podemos seguir trabajando con el área de salud y seguridad en trabajo, ni siquiera con las áreas de gestión del talento humano. Nos ha tocado movernos hacia el área más estratégica y cuando tocamos directivos es que es posible que logramos que se involucren en procesos y programas, no en actividades puntuales de perdón la expresión, abrazoterapia o Los Ángeles o la lectura de Laura, que eso al fin no tiene ningún impacto ni sirve para nada. Pero ha sido desde arriba, desde la estrategia, desde el directivo hacia abajo, donde hemos logrado tener impacto. ¿Y cómo lo hemos logrado? Hay que cambiar el lenguaje, o sea, ellos no nos leen y nos entienden el tema de técnico nosotros. Hay que hablarles en el lenguaje del empresario y en su mismo lenguaje y lograr introducir ahí el mensaje. Esa ha sido la experiencia que nosotros hemos tenido con muchas empresas multilatinas y grandes empresas, pero tenemos que cambiar, somos nosotros. Siempre estamos esperando que ellos entiendan nuestro lenguaje. No va a pasar nunca. Nunca va a pasar. Y no nos ha pasado a nosotros. Cuando hemos cambiado es que hemos logrado llegar a una junta directiva de un gran grupo económico y que ellos se involucren en el proceso. Pero esto no ha sido posible.
Buen punto, doctor Ier. Doctora Juana Patlán, quisiera dar un breve cierre.
Lo voy a sintetizar, muy sintéticamente.
Sintéticamente.
Me gustó mucho el tema de conceptualización, pero yo creo que nos hace falta publicar más, mucho. La taxonomía de los factores, la conceptualización de estos factores con estos enfoques macro, es decir, hacer libros, no sé, yo quisiera como más todavía porque se va quedando y hay mucho por ir dejando huella, por ir dejando las bases, y en intervención pasa lo mismo. También desde todo, desde los fundamentos teóricos, metodología, resultados, que ha sido exitoso, que no, porque si no lo hacemos, lo van a hacer otros un día. Como digo yo, el TEC de Monterrey. Gracias.
Pues si no hubiera más comentarios, deje ver Bueno, Xochiquetzal tiene varias. No sé si quisieras brevemente, doctora,
Sí,
comentar.
pues creo que coincido con el doctor Idier, que justo cuando se toca el equipo de liderazgo, cuando se toca las cabezas y se sensibiliza a ellos, entonces podemos cascadear, ¿no? La salud, la seguridad, el bienestar psicosocial, la conciencia, se barre como las escaleras de arriba para abajo. Si el líder, y a eso me refería hace rato cuando comenté con la doctora Strabuska, que requerimos trabajar desde dentro de la organización, pero tocando las cabezas. Cuando el equipo de liderazgo es consciente de que cuidar el factor psicosocial va a redituar de alguna manera más tarde, más temprano, la productividad, la satisfacción, la disminución de errores, el cuidado de la calidad, etcétera. Entonces, esos tiene un efecto positivo, tangible y medible. Pero, y obviamente a la par tenemos que trabajar con los colaboradores, ¿no? Nosotros, por ejemplo, he trabajado 20 años en la parte de salud ocupacional y, y más o menos los últimos 10 años he trabajado a la par con la salud mental. Y justo cuando muestro estos reportes a los empresarios, ¿no? De, mira, tu gente en este porcentaje tiene estrés, en este porcentaje tal, en este porcentaje tal, y hemos ubicado que tal y tal y tal líder o cabeza o supervisor están siendo el origen tal vez del estresor o tal vez de la violencia, etcétera. Ha habido empresas que toman en consideración los comentarios y que entonces justo desde esa sensibilización generan los cambios en los equipos de liderazgo o inician los entrenamientos en habilidades blandas. Y entonces eso sensibiliza, porque al contrario, ¿no? Cuando me topo, por ejemplo, con estos empresarios, que los he visto, a donde yo al empresario le digo, oye, es que no puedes pretender que tu gente se cuide, que coma bien, que haga ejercicio, si los tienes en unas jornadas de 11 horas al día, de lunes a sábado, y si beben a 2 horas de la casa, y si además apenas les alcanza el sueldo. Y le dije, se trata el bienestar de disciplina, pero también de tiempo y también de recurso. Y el discurso de esta empresaria fue, yo creo que es más disciplina, doctora. Y dije, a ver, no estás entendiendo. O sea, si tu gente trabaja de lunes a sábado, no tiene ratos de ocio, no tiene tiempo de un sueño adecuado, no tiene energía para ir a caminar 20 minutos, entonces no va a cuidar su salud mental, no va a estar comprometido contigo y solamente está desde el automatismo, ¿no? O estas otras empresas que de pronto desde la necesidad de control no permiten, por ejemplo, el home office, ¿no? En donde hay trabajadores que dicen, oye, yo sería muy feliz haciendo home office porque mi posición lo permite, porque tengo todos los recursos en casa y me ahorraría 4 horas de tráfico. Y entonces uno piensa, ¿cuántos empresarios podrían hacer estas gestiones? Y entonces a lo mejor 10% de la población que está atorada en el tráfico pudiera no estarlo. Y si empieza el bienestar con ellos mismos, entonces eso se va a permear y se va a espejear a la vez, ¿no? Por eso les decía, a lo mejor son intervenciones bien chiquititas en una empresa en donde a lo mejor de 100, 10 van haciendo el cambio real y entonces justamente se va a permear a sus compañeros, a su equipo de liderazgo hacia abajo, a su equipo hacia arriba. Y entonces, pequeños cambios en conjunto con las políticas sociales, por supuesto, y con los recursos que la organización pueda otorgar, pues entonces se pueden empezar a hacer cambios más visibles, ¿no? Pero sí, insisto, creo que y coincido completamente con Idier, que requerimos tocar al equipo de liderazgo, pero no solo al responsable de salud en el trabajo, no solo al responsable de recursos humanos, porque si lanzamos campañas justo en donde digamos, mándame a tu equipo de liderazgo a que lo entrene, nos van a mandar esos personajes, ¿no? Sino más bien a las gerencias más altas, más bien a los tomadores de decisiones, ¿no? Y que se ha visto, digo, a lo mejor no en este tema, pero pienso, por ejemplo, alguna vez en una empresa dando una capacitación de la norma 36, ¿no? Manejo de cargas, en donde involucraron al gerente de finanzas, al gerente de producción, al gerente de tal, y entonces seguridad y higiene tenía 2 años pidiendo que compraran una grúa porque la gente estaba cargando demasiado, etcétera. Cuando llegó el de finanzas al curso y con números les dije, esto cuesta una lesión, este porcentaje de trabajadores se va a lesionar, van a ir a un ST7, van a ir a un ST9, etcétera. Entonces el gerente de finanzas volteó y le dijo al de seguridad, ¿cuánto me dijiste que costaba la grúa? Entonces creo que ese es el idioma que ellos hablan, ¿no? El idioma que ellos hablan son números, son costos, son mejoras, son tiempos de respuesta, etcétera. Y entonces, pues sí, obviamente nosotros no debemos dejar o perder de vista el macro, pero quizá tendríamos que empezar a ver el macro de organización por organización, ¿no? En donde justo toquemos a la cabeza que toma las decisiones. No, no creo que sea sencillo, pero bueno, es creo un buen deseo.
Bueno, pues si no hubiera más comentarios, interesantes comentarios, pues damos por terminada nuestra sesión. Y esperamos que sigamos discutiendo estos temas el próximo año. Les deseamos un feliz fin de año a todos, a nuestro estimado Idier, a todos los demás amigos. Y bueno, que vengan muchos éxitos el año próximo. Gracias a todos, que estén